I spoke to Chris Hipkins a short time ago and asked if he'd just handed the 2026 election to National, given a capital gains tax is seen by many as political kryptonite.
I think New Zealanders understand that we need to make a change. We can't keep doing what we've been doing now. Most New Zealanders that I speak to are anxious about the number of younger New Zealanders who are giving up on this country and leaving with no intention of coming back. We've got to change. We've got to stop viewing investment in rental houses as the primary form of investment for a lot of people. We need to invest in the productive economy that creates good, well-paying jobs for New Zealanders, and we need to make sure that the next generation of New Zealanders feel like they've got the chance to own their own home.
Sure, but they will now be able to go into that 2026 campaign and for the next 12 months have a very simple message that Labor wants to tax you more.
Well, the National Party are sounding more and more desperate by the day. They haven't balanced the budget. They're continuing to cut. Their message around health is if you vote for them, you're going to get more cuts to public services. I'm saying we can't cut any deeper than they already have. New Zealanders are missing out on health care. We've got people showing up in emergency departments with avoidable illnesses because they haven't been able to go and see the doctor because they can't afford it. We can't go on the way we are now.
So the Finance Minister, Nicola Willis, has this afternoon said that this new tax is a slippery slope that will lead to more taxes and make it harder for Kiwis to save for retirement. Winston Peters is calling it a disaster, and even your natural coalition partner, the Greens, well, they're saying that it doesn't go far enough. Does this new policy have any political support?
Well, when you're greeted with hysteria on the right of the political spectrum, parties on the left are saying they'd like us to go further, and most of the economists are saying actually this is a simple and sensible change that's long overdue, that probably means we're in about the right place.
Why bring this in now? Both you and former PM Jacinda Ardern categorically ruled it out in the last two election cycles, so why now?
New Zealand's one of the only countries in the world that doesn't have any form of capital gains tax. It means that salary and wage earners cop the largest share of the tax burden, and that does need to change. We do need to change the way we think about tax. We need to make sure that people who are making lots and lots of money from speculation in the housing market in particular are actually paying their fair share of tax so that it eases the pressure on other people.
Yeah, in terms of the timing though, the housing market is no longer considered to be superheated, and in fact many people are finding themselves negatively geared due to falling house prices. But you really believe that the time is right for this now?
It's never a great time to introduce any form of new taxes, but at some point New Zealand needs to make that step. The Australians did it in the 1980s, and they're now seeing the benefits from that. It's well and truly time New Zealand caught up. We are one of the only countries in the world not to have any form of capital gains tax. This is a simple, straightforward, easy to implement tax. 9 out of 10 New Zealanders won't pay it because it will only be paid by people who own multiple houses or commercial property. The vast majority of New Zealanders won't pay it, but everyone will benefit from the extra money that goes into the health system.
First off, apologies guys, I don't have a camera this week. Something's going on with that. But to touch on Chris Hipkins, I do note he said a couple times there that New Zealand has no form of capital gains tax. That's just a flat-out lie, because the Bright Line test is about as close to a capital gains tax as you can get without calling it a capital gains tax. It effectively does exactly what this policy does, but it applies during a limited window. So if you, presently, if you sell that property within 2 years, you'll be taxed on that capital gain. It was at one point up to 10 years. Labor did that, and they brought it up from 5 years, and so naturally, because National wasn't happy about them changing it, when National got back in, they reverted it and brought it to only 2 years or something like that. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a multiple home owner, so it's not something that impacts me. I don't think about it very often. But that Bright Line test is effectively a capital gains tax, and so be it a literal capital gains tax or a form of capital gains tax, with a few variations here and there, the idea that we have had no form of capital gains tax ever is just a lie. But additionally, he kind of missed the point with the whole National just wants to cut spending. They just want to cut and gut our health system and all of that sort of stuff. And that's all they're proposing. That's the difference between the two. Labor wants to make sure our health system's working for people and provide health care. National wants to gut our health system and ensure our health system's not working. And that's clear because National wants to cut funding from it. What they ignore is, one, National not doing nearly enough to cut anything from anything. And two, National isn't proposing cutting frontline services, though they have implemented their policy in such a way where frontline services aren't necessarily being protected because they're too cowardly to do the cutting themselves. And the reason they've done this, in my opinion, is because if they were to go out of their way to take charge of the cuts, then they could be held more liable than if they just say, hey, we'll leave it up to each individual public sector to make the cuts themselves, right? So they'll give the public sector some expectations, some margins, some cost-cutting margins, and then the public sector will, with themselves, figure out how they're going to do that, each individual sector. The problem is they leave that in the hands of the people that actually need to be cut. They leave that in the hands of these very well-paid bureaucrats who do not care about the actual sectors they work for, who are completely out of touch with the needs of these sectors. And so they are not cutting the right things, they are making it less efficient, and they're ultimately not doing anything of value, where what we actually need is to cut all of the fat. All of the fat. If you can make the system work without these people, get rid of them. I do not care. If we do not need the public sector to be that big, it should not be that big. I do not care about their jobs. They can look for something elsewhere. That's a harsh, but I think it's fair. Because this is taxpayers' money we're talking about. You can't just spend it because it's there. It's only there because you argue it needs to be there, but for the most part, it doesn't. There's a reason why we spend significantly more a percentage of GDP every year now than we did 40, 50 years ago. And it's because we've allowed ourselves to grow and grow and grow the public sector with how much better are our outcomes? Education's worse. Health, you could argue, is worse. It's certainly harder to get quality healthcare when you need it than it once was. And there are various reasons for this, population growth being one of them. But a big part of how much money we're spending is purely because we've allowed the bureaucracy to grow. But we haven't got the results for that growth. And so, if National were true to their word, they would cut all of the fat from every government department, meaning that we can get exactly what Labor wants here without having to introduce a capital gains tax. Without having to introduce a wealth tax, without having to increase GDP, without having to really do any form of new government revenue gathering measures. But no. The way that Labor sees it is the bigger the bureaucracy is, the better the service works. Obviously, there's no evidence to support this, but that is what they believe. And if the Greens had it their way, every single dollar that the government took in, and they would be taking in significantly more than even Labor wants, would go to the public sector and growing the public sector and growing government control over every area of life so that they can micromanage everything and ensure that people are getting exactly what they determine isn't required or necessary. Chris Hipkins notes only 1 out of every 10 people will be impacted by this. Because this is the way the left goes. They want to take the money from the wealthy and redistribute it through their own, whatever they determine, and redistribute it to those who aren't as well off. The problem is what his policy actually is and how he's proposing that we utilize this new revenue. He wants effectively universal GP visits. He wants to spend about $650 million a year so that every single New Zealander, regardless of how much money they make, can get 3 free GP visits every year. What a waste of money. Because the vast majority of people don't need free GP visits. A good chunk of people won't even visit the GP, and it's not because they can't afford it, it's because they don't want to or don't need it. I've been dealing with chronic illness for the last 4 and a bit years, and I've only needed the GP on maybe 5 or 6 occasions in that time. Why? Well, in my case, because once I only really utilized them for new medication and for establishing pathways towards certain treatment options or investigations. That was it. And in those cases, it was easier to just go to the hospital because they would typically fast track it once you're actually there. So I didn't need the GP that much. Plus, for those who are desperately in need of either subsidized GP visits or, healthcare, or free in some cases, we already have those systems in place. Because, albeit throughout this time, given I was, extremely unwell and I was on a sickness benefit for a while, much of this didn't cost me a cent. Much of it didn't cost me a cent, and even after the fact, I was still getting, half price or reduced prices through community services cards. So again, these things are in place for those who are actually in need of this already. What they're doing is they are relying on an appeal to emotion fallacy to convince you that this is good, that this is needed, but really they just want to take more of your money so that they can spend it poorly. Why? Not to benefit you, but to get back power. Power is all they desire.